Princess Diana's letters to her family's former housekeeper are going on sale at auction next week. The letters provide insight into the princess's private life.
When Prince Charles got engaged to Diana Spencer in 1981, fans got their first peek at a ring that would go on to become one of the most recognizable rocks in the world.
This wonderful sapphire diamond.
Some things stay hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to be found. That's exactly what happened when King Charles and Prince William opened a box that once belonged to Princess Diana. Inside, they found a handwritten note that stopped them in their tracks.
32 letters in their possession since Diana wrote them in 1995 and 1996. The couple were very close with Princess Diana throughout the time that she was going through her very public divorce from the now King Charles.
No one expected it, and it changed the atmosphere in the room completely. What could Diana have written that moved them both to tears after all this time? Join us as we take you inside that moment and the message that still lingers to this day. Uncovering the past. It happened in May 2025, on what seemed like just another ceremonial day in the royal calendar. But it didn't stay that way for long. Westminster Abbey was dressed in all its usual grandeur as King Charles stepped out with a badge of the Order of the Bath gleaming on his chest. By his side stood Prince William, composed as always, taking in the moment. That day he was being formally appointed Great Master of the Order.
King Charles and Prince William have shared a private moment before participating in the Order of the Bath service. The ceremony celebrated the 300th anniversary of the order, which included Charles as the sovereign for the first time.
A position his father once held, and now passed on in what looked like a seamless royal transition. Everything looked like tradition, polished and well-rehearsed. But something very different was waiting beyond the walls of the Abbey. After the ceremony, while the press remained occupied outside and guests began making their way to the usual post-event reception, King Charles signaled to William, and the two of them were ushered away from the crowd. They made their way to a lesser-known corridor leading to a restricted royal storage room, just a short walk from Clarence House. That room is not something the public ever sees. Inside are shelves of family records, personal collections, and jewelry archives, all kept under strict climate controls and guarded access. These hold pieces with their own heavy meanings, things tied to memory, not just monarchy. Waiting for them, there was one of the senior royal archivists, holding a thin folder and wearing the kind of expression that told them this wasn't a casual check-in. He wasted no time before speaking. He said an item had resurfaced during the routine review of personal effects, one that had not been touched or reviewed since 1997. That was the year they lost Diana, and anything tied to it carried a different kind of weight. The archivist then led them to a secured drawer labeled simply, Princess of Wales, Private Effects. What they saw inside was a small, velvet-lined jewelry box, dark navy with softened edges and a silk interior. It had belonged to Diana, kept with her private items after the divorce, then stored under extra security following her passing. No one had opened it since. William asked why it was being brought to their attention now. The archivist explained that during recent inventory checks, they noticed the box was heavier than expected.
Good morning. So this viewer, Anne, I'm going to show you her in a second, her granddaughter wrote in and said, "You have to see my granny's Princess Diana collection."
And upon inspection, they suspected it had a false bottom or hidden compartment, something they had never noticed before. Charles didn't speak right away, but his eyes remained fixed on the box. He recognized it. William glanced at him, then back at the box, saying nothing. The three of them stood there, the silence stretching longer than usual. This was no longer about ceremony or regalia or titles. It was about something left behind, something personal, possibly untouched for nearly 3 decades. Whatever was inside, it had waited patiently, unnoticed by the world, and now With no warning, it had found its way back into their lives, changing the tone of the day completely. The ceremony was done, but for Charles and William, something far more intimate was just beginning. The box itself was navy blue, with a soft sheen that had faded over time, its edges slightly worn but still holding the same gentle curve it always had. When William touched it, he could feel that it had once been handled often. The kind of item someone keeps nearby rather than locked away. Inside, the white silk lining was still clean, though faintly yellowed with age, carrying the unmistakable scent of time and memory. The archivist confirmed what Charles and William had already guessed. This box had come from Kensington Palace, once part of Diana's private collection. It had been transferred out shortly after her divorce in 1996.
Well, now we have to worry about who gets the wedding gift walk, who gets the casserole set. Diana has agreed to get a divorce from Prince Charles,
Sealed and placed under discreet archival protection, not long before her death the following year. Neither man said a word at first as the lid was gently opened. Sitting neatly inside were several small items, things that immediately stirred recognition. The first to catch their eyes was the delicate gold D pendant Diana used to wear on a fine chain, something once so closely tied to her identity. Alongside it were a few inexpensive costume bracelets she used to wear around the house, familiar in their simplicity, but never without sentimental meaning. William gently lifted one and turned it over, remembering the soft clink it used to make when she hugged him. There was also a tiny, hand-drawn note folded and tucked under one of the chains, obviously from years ago. Scribbled in a young child's hand, it was signed, "Love you, Mummy, H." And though it didn't say more than a few words, it didn't have to. Next to it was a charm that had once been missing from one of Diana's bracelets. This was something William hadn't seen in years. He remembered asking about it as a boy, only to be told it had fallen off and might have been lost during a trip. Yet here it was, still intact, its tiny engraving now barely visible. Charles looked at it longer than the rest, just taking it in. These were pieces of life, of motherhood, and of small moments that belonged to no one else but her and her sons. And then came the pause. Tucked beneath the silk, almost hidden, was a fine seam in the lining that the archivist gently tugged at. It revealed a slim false bottom. Inside was a single envelope, carefully folded, with familiar handwriting on its surface. It read, "For William and Papa. Not now, but one day." The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's. Neat, but slightly slanted, like it always was when she was trying to keep her thoughts composed. William reached for it, his hand slowing just before touching the paper, as if unsure whether to open it yet. Charles watched closely, but said nothing. The room was still, as if the envelope itself had brought time to a stop. This was something left with intention, for them to find during reflection. And now, nearly 30 years after her passing, that moment had finally arrived. Whatever Diana had written, it had been kept in silence, guarded by time, and placed exactly where she wanted it to be. And now that silence was about to be broken. Beyond the crown. Charles stared at the envelope for several long seconds without speaking, his hand resting just on the edge of the jewelry box, close enough that William could feel the weight of everything his father was holding back. William looked at him carefully, then said almost gently, "We should open it together." His voice was steady, calm, the way you speak to someone who needs a little grounding. Charles gave a slight nod but didn't move at first, his eyes still fixed on the handwritten words. Because even now, even with all that had happened since 1997, the idea of hearing Diana's voice again, even just through a letter, felt like something he wasn't fully ready for. Not because he didn't care, but because he did. And sometimes that makes it harder. It took a moment, but then he finally spoke. She always meant for them to have something. I remember she said that. William, hearing this, knew what his father was referring to because back when Diana and Charles formally divorced in 1996,
Princess of Wales, with huge sadness and regret, agreed to Prince Charles's request for a divorce.
there had been long, difficult discussions about personal things. Behind the scenes, away from the public, Diana had insisted on meeting Charles in private more than once, and during those talks, they agreed on how to divide certain items. This was because Diana wanted her personal things handled with care. Things like letters, keepsakes, gifts, and memories that wouldn't go into museums or public archives, but would instead stay within the family. There were notes scribbled during those talks, handwritten reminders of what was meant for the boys when they were older. But not all of it was officially recorded or listed in formal wills. Both Charles and Diana knew that preserving pieces of her heart for William and Harry mattered most to her, even if it wasn't written down in full legal language. And now, one of those very things was sitting right in front of them, sealed by her own hand, kept hidden for decades, waiting for this exact moment. William placed his hand gently on his father's shoulder, the way a son does when he understands the depth of what's being felt, and said, "Mom would have wanted us both to read it, not just me." Those words seemed to ease something in Charles, not fully, but just enough to break the hesitation. Charles finally reached for the envelope, lifting it slowly, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. William steadied it with him, holding one side so they could do it together, a single-page paper folded once, tucked inside the envelope that bore only 2 words in Diana's unmistakable handwriting. For them. It was dated March 3, 1997, just 5 months before the crash, and the opening line hit like a weight neither of them had expected. "If you found this, then something has gone wrong. But I'm at peace, and I want you to be too." That first sentence stopped everything around them. She didn't speak with fear. There was no panic in her handwriting, no sign of bitterness. She had written it with the knowledge that life could take unexpected turns, and that, if it did, she wanted her sons, and even Charles, to find something in her words that could help them move forward. "To my boys, by now, you're men," she wrote, "but I hope when you read this, you still remember our laughter, the 3 of us. Remember Highgrove? Spring afternoons in the orchard. William racing ahead, Harry always behind me, full of questions. And you, Charles, watching us from the bench like you didn't want to disturb the moment." She paused the memory there, then moved straight into something deeper. "We didn't make it easy, you and I, but there were moments when we got it right, when we both just listened. That night in the garden, after the lawyers left. I told you I didn't want bitterness. You said you didn't either. That meant something to me." William's eyes stayed on the line that followed next. "William, you'll do it better, darling, because you've seen it up close. You've seen what not to do, and more importantly, what must always be done. Protect your brother."
On Diana, Princes William and Harry have now spoken about the role Prince Charles played in the days immediately after their mother's death. The brothers were at Balmoral when they were told what happened on that night in 1997. Their father was, said Harry, there for us. He tried to make sure we were protected, he said.
Protect your people, and protect the part of yourself that isn't public. Then she added something that caught them both off guard. "And Charles, if you're reading this too, thank you. You gave me the boys. You gave me space when I asked. And you kept this safe. That means more to me than I can say." One sentence carried the entire weight of everything Diana had never said out loud after 1996. "Take care of each other. Please. That's all I've ever wanted." When it was over, neither of them moved for a while. Because in just a few paragraphs, Diana had managed to speak to both of them with grace, without blame, and with a kind of clarity that only someone who knew how short life could be would ever choose to write with. Charles hadn't expected that. A section not about William or Harry, not about the future, but directly for him. She had written it in smaller letters, like it was meant to be read alone. I know what we weren't, but I never doubted what you were to them. Charles didn't move. William looked at him, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring at that line, and the next. And one day, when it all rests on you, pass it on with love. For a moment, Charles didn't speak. He folded the note halfway and pressed his thumb on the crease, like he needed a second to breathe. Then William saw that his father's hand trembled slightly. This was a return to the one part of Diana he'd always kept guarded, the part that forgave him, even when the world didn't. He broke down with the kind of collapse only someone who had been holding too much for too long could have. And for a moment, it was like he wasn't king, wasn't heir, and wasn't a Windsor. That one sentence had reopened a box he'd locked away decades ago. And William saw it all return, without a word being spoken. He thought of the days after the crash, how his father had kept them shielded from the press, made sure they didn't see the worst of it, how he'd taken them to Balmoral, where no cameras could reach, how he'd arranged every detail of the funeral while the world watched and judged. What many never knew was that it was Charles who stood firm when others wanted to limit the funeral's scale. He'd insisted the boys walk behind her coffin, but only if they were willing. He'd made calls behind the scenes to keep Diana's name from being dragged further after her death. William had read the note more than once already, but now he circled back to the line meant only for him. When you wear the ring, remember it's more than tradition. It's love passed forward. Give that to her. Give that to them. There it was. She didn't name Kate, but he knew. She didn't know their names yet. George, Charlotte, Louis, but somehow she saw them, in the way only a mother could guess where her child's heart was headed. He hadn't expected her to write about marriage. Not in 1997 when he was still so young, but she had. His mother's sapphire, the ring he gave Kate. He remembered holding on to it before the proposal.
William and Kate's royal wedding couldn't escape its share of blunders. While Catherine, now the Princess of Wales, received the famous sapphire ring upon her engagement to Prince William that had once belonged to Princess Diana.
The way his fingers lingered on the band, and the sense that he wasn't just giving a piece of jewelry. Now, with the note in hand, it made sense. Diana had framed it perfectly. Its love passed forward. He paused there and folded the corner of the page lightly. He could feel his throat tighten, his mind pull at 1,000 things at once. His mother, his wife, their wedding, the moment Kate stepped out wearing the Spencer tiara, and the children now sleeping back home. She had written one more thing to him. Some things don't need a crown to be royal. The Spencer tiara, worn on her wedding day, passed down through her side of the family. She was reminding him legacy didn't begin or end with the throne. That message stayed with him, because William had lived his whole life walking that line. Royal, yet modern. Traditional, yet open. He'd tried to do it differently, not in rejection of the past, but in reflection of it. Diana saw that coming. And now, reading this message in her own handwriting, it all rushed forward at once. He stood up, still holding the paper, and saying nothing. Charles watched him walk to the door, open it gently, and step out without looking back. He just needed a moment alone. On the corridor outside, William leaned against the wall, full of the life he was carrying. His role as a father, a husband, a son, and one day, a king. And it struck him that this note, these short words from decades ago, tied it all together. But what do you pass on when words run out, but memory still lingers? A royal legacy unlocked. After the letter, they didn't speak much, but both knew there was more inside the box. Not just valuables, but symbols. Small things that held meaning only to those who lived with them, not those who watched from afar. William reached in first. His hand brushed against something thin and framed, an old photo slightly curled at the edges. It was him, maybe 2 years old, cradled in Diana's arms. She was laughing, mid-laugh, and he was reaching for her hair. He didn't remember the moment, but the feeling landed anyway. He held it in silence. Then Charles noticed the tiny velvet pouch tucked beneath some folded silk. He opened it carefully, almost instinctively, and out slid a miniature sapphire charm, small, round, deep blue, almost identical to the stone from Diana's engagement ring. But unlike that one, this hadn't been part of state appearances or wedding ceremonies. This was the one she wore, with bracelets and casual chains, at home, or while picking them up from school. William looked at it and nodded before even saying a word. He knew it. She used to wear this with that old denim shirt, he said, almost smiling. Charles remembered it too. It wasn't royal in the traditional sense, but it was hers. And that made it more valuable than anything stored behind bulletproof glass at the palace. There was a pause. Then William spoke again, slower now. When Charlotte turned 16, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Charles met his gaze, and for a moment, father and son were simply that. Men passing on something precious to the girl who'd carry both Diana's blood and name forward in her own way. The charm wouldn't be given now, not for headlines or appearances, but in time when the moment was right. And then came the quietest part of the afternoon. Charles gathered the silk, the pouch, the photo, the note, and everything else that had been in the box. With deliberate hands, he began laying each item back where it had originally sat. "I'll catalog it all," he said softly, "but not for public view. This was for family, and family only." The box wasn't locked anymore, but it was no less sacred. Its contents had spoken louder than any state tribute or press release ever could. And as Charles and William stepped out of that small, long-forgotten room, they didn't say much. For a moment, they just stood there in the hallway side by side. The same hallway they'd probably walked 100 times, but never like this. Charles looked ahead and, almost without meaning to, said quietly, "She knew more than any of us gave her credit for." William didn't hesitate. "She still does." And that was all. They didn't stop to break down what had just happened. The contents of the box had already done that. No public speech, no palace announcement, no royal biographer could explain the shift. But it was there, real, and it lingered. Later, it showed up in the smallest ways. In Charles's public appearances, there was a noticeable softness. When he visited cancer awareness centers, especially since his own diagnosis, people noticed he wasn't just speaking about the issue. He was inside it, present, focused, and more vulnerable than ever before. And William, seen with his children or walking beside Kate during Earthshot events, looked different too. Not tired or robotic, but calmer and grounded. As if the weight he'd been carrying all his life, between duty, legacy, and grief, had finally adjusted to fit his shoulders. And in those brief moments when the cameras weren't flashing, you could see it between them. Charles would glance at William not with formality, but with familiarity. And William no longer looked like a man trying to balance two worlds. He was building one of his own. The jewelry box wasn't the miracle, the note didn't erase the past, nothing fixed everything, but it unlocked the part of them that still remembered her, not as a figure, not as a controversy, not even as a princess, but simply as Mum, or Diana. And that was enough. Before they left the house that evening, Charles made one promise. He would keep the box preserved just as it was. It would remain in the family, not behind glass, but behind trust. And as for the little sapphire charm, that too was agreed on, with a look and not much more. When Charlotte turns 16, it will be hers because it carries something beautiful with it: love passed forward. That night, no press release went out. The world didn't know anything had changed, but the monarchy, in its own private way, had taken a step. For the first time in a long time, Charles and William weren't two men separated by history, expectations, and unspoken things. They were two men carrying the same memory, finally facing in the same direction. What do you think? Did Diana truly want them to carry her legacy, love, or both? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what this meant to you. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.